Hi.
Hello again. We're in Genesis chapter 13 at verse 10. We'll go to the end of the chapter.
And I'm reading from the NIV. Lot looked up and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan was well watered, like the garden of the Lord's, like the land of Egypt, toward Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan, and set out toward the east. The two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain, and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked, and were sinning greatly against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had parted from him, "Lift up your eyes from where you are, and look north and south, east and west. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you." So Abram moved his tents and went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord.
So it's interesting that this promise, this land promise specifically, is not given to Abram until after Lot separates from him. We make much of the fact that the separation is caused by their joint prosperity, causing friction among their help at least, so they have to separate. But look how Lot makes his choice. I think verse 10 is so significant.
He looks up and sees, so he's following his eyes. It's kind of the same thing you hear with Eve, seeing the tree and seeing that it's desirable. Well, he's looking at this land, and he's looking at the most desirable area, and that's what he chooses. So he follows his eyes.
A direct link to the garden of the Lord. So we are reminded immediately of two aspects of the temptation story in Genesis chapter 3, aren't we? And then you see the cost of that. Not so much here, although there's a kind of an ominous note to, and he moved his tent near to Sodom. The translation could be either near or as far as Sodom.
Yeah.
But the point is, in the next chapter.
Yeah, by chapter 14, verse 12, it says he's in the city, in Sodom.
And we know what that leads to.
Yeah.
Whereas that Abraham has to intervene for.
Yeah, Abram is not building a dwelling. He's content to be in a tent and move around.
Yeah.
That's his pattern.
So what would you have missed in the promise, the explicit promise here about the land, if you were a Jehovah's Witness?
Yeah, the promise is in verse 15, where he says, "All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever." And I think that word forever is missing in the mind of most witnesses, because they think it was canceled when Israel as a nation was disobedient.
So do you think...
But it's a I will give you. It's God says that. He doesn't say it's conditional on whether or not your children are good. He just says, "I will give it to you and your offspring forever." It's his promise, unilateral. No conditions attached to it. And I think we know that Abram, he was faithful in the end. He was said to be the father of faith. He didn't get any of that land. Stephen says that in his speech. In Acts 7:5, he says that he never got a foot of it. Not even a foot.
Do we know that as witnesses? No. I don't think I'd ever seen that verse.
No.
He didn't even receive a foot of the land, and yet we know he walks throughout the land.
Yeah.
And he continues to tent all over the land.
So when you read that verse, I mean, I think that's a good thing to show witnesses and ask them, do you believe this promise of God to Abram? Do you believe it's true? Well, they say no. They say it's all reversed now. It's all canceled.
And the hard truth,
never will be true.
The hard truth about the history of Israel is that most Israelites and Jews have never lived in the Promised Land. So will it be fulfilled, or is it all canceled? Because, like you said, we tend to take it with the law covenant as being bilateral. That is conditional upon their compliance with the law. But this is stated well before the law.
Yeah.
This is stated when Abraham is still one man. Still Abram, because Abraham means father of a multitude. He's not had a single child yet.
Yeah.
Here's what Griffith Thomas, F.B. Meyer, and Campbell Morgan have to say about Lot and his choice and how he contrasts with Abram. There are many modern counterparts to Lot's action. Even professedly Christian people often choose their home in a locality simply for its scenery, or its society, or its other material advantages, without once inquiring what church privileges are there. The souls of their children may starve amid worldliness and polite indifference. The same disastrous choice is often made in connection with public schools, to which boys are sent simply for the position and reputation of the school, regardless of the moral and spiritual atmosphere of the institution. This was the great mistake of Lot's life, from which he ever afterwards suffered. And of course, we know how that story ends up when Sodom is destroyed. Griffith Thomas said this 100 years ago, so how much more is it true now?
Yeah, it is something that you should consider when you're thinking about where you're living. Then F.B. Meyer says, how many have stood upon those Bethel heights, intent on the same errand as took Lot thither? Age after age has poured forth its crowds of young hearts, to stand upon an exceeding high mountain, whilst before them have been spread all the kingdoms of the world, and the glory of them. The tempter whispering that for one act of obeisance all shall be theirs. In assurance and self-confidence, eager to do the very best for themselves, prepared to consider the moralities only insofar as these did not interfere with what they held to be the main chance of life. Thus have succeeding generations looked towards the plains of Sodom from afar. And alas, like Lot, they have tried to make stones into bread. They have cast themselves down from the mountainside for angels to catch. They have knelt before the tempter to find his promise broken. The vision of power and illusion, the soul beggared forever, whilst the tempter, with hollow laugh, has disappeared, leaving his dupe standing alone in the midst of a desolate wilderness. Let us not condemn Lot too much because he chose without reference to the moral and religious conditions of the case, lest in judging him we pronounce sentence on ourselves. Lot did nothing more than is done by scores of professing Christians every day.
Wow, what a last line.
Well, yep.
Well, so we don't condemn Lot, but we do learn, we hope, from his bad example.
Yeah.
He brought disaster on himself and his children.
Yeah.
By the choice he made with his eyes.
We should learn from it. Yeah.
And then you have Campbell Morgan on the contrast between Lot and Abram. This third communication of Jehovah to Abram is remarkable in that it sets Abram in direct contrast to Lot in every way. Lot, in response to the selfish desire for his own enrichment, had chosen for himself. And now Jehovah declared his choice for Abram. Lot had chosen by sight. He lifted up his eyes and beheld. Abram, by faith, had chosen not to choose for himself, but to leave himself entirely to the direction of Jehovah. And now Jehovah brought him into the place of sight on the basis of his faith. Lot had lifted up his eyes in answer to his own impulse. Now Jehovah commanded Abram, lift up now thine eyes. And he did so in answer to the divine command. Lot, having thus chosen, obtained, but was unable to possess. Abram, in trusting God, received from him the title deeds to all the land, even including that which Lot had chosen for himself. I don't think we think about that.
No, I like the expression, Abraham by faith had chosen not to choose. It says to leave himself entirely to the direction of Jehovah. So I think that is the trick to life, is to to get to the point where you're not making the choices, you're actually waiting on God to point the way. But that usually takes a lot of trial and error, I would say.
Yeah.
Takes a lot of and you're going to sometimes do it and sometimes not. I think that's the history of life. But the better choice is the one Abraham made here. Not to choose, but to let God choose for him.
It's a great point. We'll put in a link to our Paradise Lost playlist, where we look at the way the Watchtower has grabbed all these promises that were given to Abram and his literal offspring, not primarily to his spiritual offspring. This is about land, after all. How they've taken all these land promises literally, except the geography of the promises, which you find is a pattern when you look at the individual prophecies the Watchtower tends to appropriate, for instance, from Isaiah. Look at them and look at the context of those promises, specifically the famous ones in Isaiah chapters 25 and 35 and 65, where you grab all the stuff about the paradise earth conditions and people living for centuries, etc. But they're all geographical when you look more closely at them. So that playlist is about 19 videos, I believe, and we'll put a link into the first one, which is called The Counterfeit Kingdom of the Watchtower, and the playlist as a whole. See you soon.